Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm Jeff Pender, joined here today with two of my colleagues, Michael Goldberg. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Jeff.
And Dave Nabose, our education reporter, who has been on this show before, but Davna has returned. She left Mississippi Today for a period of time, then came to her senses and has returned and is our education reporter. Davna, welcome back.
Thanks.
And we have as our guest today someone else who has been on the show before. We have House Education Chairman Representative Rob Roberson. Rob, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Glad to join you guys. Welcome back. Glad to have you.
Thanks.
Back in the education world.
Right.
Yeah, and quite a time to be back.
Yes.
You joined at a good time.
Which we will get to. In fact, this was a big week, and we'd probably defer to one of the two of you, Mr. Chairman. Tell us about this week and a select committee hearing.
We had it was our kickoff. Basically, we wanted some people from D.C. to come, and Lori Todd Smith. Some of you guys may remember Lori was here in Mississippi for years, and then Dr. Burke is just kind of a D.C. insider. But Dr. Smith, I actually knew her. She grew up, or not didn't grow up, but went to state, 30 years ago. And I actually got to meet her back then. And as your life has a way of returning to it, she's in D.C. now. And it was just an opportunity for her and Dr. Burke to come and speak to us about some of their thoughts in terms of school choice. You know, this information that we're getting has a lot of tie-ins to school choice. So I don't want to say that it's to diminish that part of it. But the way I'm looking at this is more about reform in its total and not necessarily just only focused on school choice. And I'll say this, the day that we went in, you know, we typically have people that unfortunately, and maybe this is just the nature of politics in general, you have people that immediately pick sides. This is a Democrat position, or this is the Republican position, or this is the independent position. And education is not something that should have a political party attached to it. And for me, it's a little bit frustrating. So one of the reasons I said what I said, I didn't want a bunch of cheering for some whatever was said in that meeting, or hissing, as it may be. In that meeting, I wanted us to absolutely be able to get kind of in deep in terms of finding out what the administration, what direction they're going in, what are some of the ideas that school choice out there has. The only side there should be in this is what's in the best interest of these children that we're dealing with. And all of the other peripheral, whether that be the politics involved or whether that be the administration involved or the teachers involved, those are important considerations while you're thinking about it, but the kids should come first. And that is at least my driving interest in how we move forward with this. You know, we're politicians. We're going to get things right. And we're going to get things wrong sometimes, but we need to at least have the opportunity to hear, and we're going to have both sides. I think one of the criticisms that I have heard were, the two people that spoke were both on school choice position, that's what the direction we should be moving in. And we're going to have other people come and speak. I'm going to try to get MDE to come and speak. I doubt very seriously that they will take a position either direction as to, you know, what they think we should do. They try to stay out of policy. But I think it's important to find out, you know, if we do some of these things, what are some of the impacts? What are some of the unintended consequences that we might find ourselves with? I don't think we're going to find all of them by any stretch of the imagination. I think that once we get into some of this, we're going to have to tweak and relook at some things. But when it's all said and done, the intent should be, where do we want to go? You know, the funny thing about all this is when you talk about, if you're against school choice, what you're basically saying is that you think we should leave it the way it is. In other words, don't do anything to change that. And we know what that looks like. We know that over the past 60 or 70 years that schools have looked like what they look like today. My question to those that would be against even looking at this direction or considering this direction is, are you happy with what we have today? And if the answer to that is no, welcome to my side. welcome to the side that wants to look at every aspect of the things that we need to do. And that's not to suggest that we should throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. But if you can pick a school in Mississippi that you would not send your child to, then you're probably not as much on the side of not having school choice as you might think you are. I've had multiple families call me about situations, and they can be in good districts. So before I say what I'm about to say, this is not about an A or an F district dynamic. You can have a parent that's just not having a good fit in the school district in which they're moving toward. And anybody that thinks that we don't have school choice, rich people have school choice. Rich people can take their money and go somewhere else and get their child educated. The only people that don't have school choice are poor kids. Kids like my dad growing up. Kids like, well, my parents, I was lucky in a lot of ways. My parents were probably lower middle class, but we couldn't afford a private school or anything if things had gone awry. So the reality is that rich people already have these choices out there. Poor children do not. And if you put the system and you suggest that the system is more important than these kids, I don't know. I just have a problem with that. I really do. And I get where you're coming from. I get that I'm very much a pro public school person. My public school in Starkville is a good school. They've done real well, but we're not creating little widgets that pop out. Every one of them are exactly alike. These are little human beings that we're dealing with. And I think we just need to have some more freedom to choose what direction is best for your child.
You know, in terms of I think the way we're talking about it now is that it's a binary, that either you're for the public school system or you're not. And I think people would say that whatever they're unhappy with, if they're not completely pleased with what we have in place, it's because schools need more money. So I guess how can you justify this funneling of public dollars to private schools when that seems to be the issue that most people would say, their schools have troubles because they don't have enough money?
How much is the right money? How much does it take? The last 2 years, we fully funded the formula. Before that, and here's the interesting dynamic at play here, y'all. A good percentage of your private schools that are opened up do not get the amount of money that we are giving public schools. Now, keep in mind that is somewhat because of the situation where public schools have to take everybody. And that's kind of an unfair equation. If I'm able to turn away a child with special needs at a private school, but the public school has to accept that child, then that's not a fair equation. So I completely understand that. But I don't care how good keep in mind, we're not just talking about whether or not the school is an A or an F. We're talking about whether that one child doesn't fit. And I don't see how you could be so against, because that's what you're doing at some point. You're saying the system is far more important than that one child that would maybe do better at the dyslexia school, or maybe do better at the private school, or maybe do better at homeschooling. I find that disingenuous. The system that we currently have set up, if we had people that were providing the leadership in there, they would have already sat down and talked about how do we get rid of some of the administration so that we could use that money better suited for those children. That is not what's going on. What's going on is we're creating superintendents, assistant superintendents, principals, assistant principals, and you may have a school that only has 500 kids in it. That is beyond ridiculous. I won't say any of names because I don't want to embarrass any of the school districts, but I've got 3 or 4 off the top of my head that are similarly situated where you have 2 districts and the total amount of kids in both districts are about 1,500 kids. They all have assistants, principals, and assistant superintendents. They all have several different buildings for their administration costs and stuff. I mean, there's $1 million right there being spent in admin. But when you say, hey, would y'all like to consolidate? Should we look at this from that? Oh, no, we don't want to do that. So the reality is, if the people that were running these systems would be a little bit more interested in doing what you just said, I'd be interested in listening to them, but they're not.
Chairman, I think a outside observer perhaps would look at Mississippi's educational outcomes over the past few years and think, wow, I mean, this is a real unique story of a state that was at the bottom of these outcomes, really turning itself around. So you mentioned not wanting to throw the baby out with the bathwater and potentially disrupting the system at a moment when we've seen these improvements. And the Mississippi Miracle, as it's called, is something that's been central to, the rhetoric of the governor and other state leaders as far as kind of selling the educational approach in Mississippi to the rest of the country. But it seems that, one of the only factors that has changed in, relatively recently is the election of President Trump. And the speaker has been very explicit that, part of the impetus for him, not all of it, but part of it, in pushing so hard for school choice is to enact, President Trump's agenda at the state level on education. So how much of this just is about the election of President Trump, since we've already seen positive outcomes without any of these school choice policies in place? So how much of this is about the election of President Trump and kind of following his wishes versus doing what's best for the public education system here?
I'm glad you tied the end of that is to everything we're going to do is going to be in the best interest of at least from my standpoint, in the best interest of our kids. This choice movement has been going on far longer than President Trump's administration. I mean, there's, I believe, 32 states that already enacted some type of school choice program. Some of those were well before President Trump ever came, to the table. So I think the impetus at this point would be, look, there's going to be some federal dollars here that we can draw down and help us do this. We've been talking about school choice. I mean, you guys know we've been talking about some of this for a couple of years now. My interest in having that discussion was to try to spawn some type of innovation that comes from within so that there would not be a surprise. Anybody that claims, we just showed up this year and magically this stuff came about, I would ask them, where have you been? I mean, I've not been very secretive in terms about, throwing these things out here to have a conversation about. As far as making certain that we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, something I think that is important to remember is, obviously I cannot predict what's going to happen in the future in terms for our state and how many people will take advantage. But the bulk of the states that have done this, there's only been about a 7 to 8%, 10% path to private school or something different. So there's only been a 7% difference. I don't want to blow this conversation up into the idea that my concept of doing something here, whatever it looks like for school choice, is a solution that, we'll never have to look at this again. That's not my thought process at all. I think we're going to have to continue looking at this. And I'm very proud of the solutions and the things that have come about over the last 10 or so years. I'm very proud of the teachers that have really worked their tails off to pushing us in a direction. So I don't want to take anything away from that Mississippi Miracle conversation that's going on. But and I hate to equate this to a football, but every great coach I've ever known was one of the most unhappy, dissatisfied people I've ever met. They're never happy with the play that their team. And I'll point you to Alabama in the past. Bear Bryant was not known to be a rosy person. So the reality is, I think that you have to have leaders that are willing to continue expecting more. And that doesn't mean to degrade or make anyone feel like we're degrading them. That's not what I'm saying. But we should always expect more. Mississippi, the same people that brought you some of the reforms of 10 years ago are the people that are talking about this now. If we were, out to harm public schools, we've really kind of gone in the weird way of doing it.
Mr. Chairman, one thing you mentioned, and I've heard you talk about it before, you pointed out a problem of small schools with administrative heavy, lots of administration, low enrollment, and you mentioned consolidation, which you have before. Well, how does that play into school choice? I mean, aren't these two different things? It would seem consolidation would kind of trend the opposite of school choice. Do you view these as the same issue or consolidation to be part of this same discussion?
I think it's very much the same discussion. There are schools out there that are not, regardless of what we do, if we do exactly what we're doing right now and do nothing, there are schools out there that are going to fail. They're going to, and when I say fail, I don't mean that they're just going to have a bad grade. I mean, eventually they're going to close.
Yeah.
There's no doubt in my mind. If we do what I'm talking about doing, that is also true. That whenever you have the ability to take your child out of a failing school system and go to maybe the next district over, or maybe go to the private school, that will expedite some of this consolidation conversation. Every time I have brought consolidation up, everyone on the outside of the areas in which need consolidating are very excited, or even people within the system sometimes. But none of those people inside the system, it's just not a very political good place to be for most of these people. And the minute I start trying to do something is the minute they start pushing in the opposite direction, not to consolidate. So we've got to do something, and somebody's got to be the proverbial bad guy, which I don't honestly think that's what it would be. It's just we've got to do the right thing for our kids and our communities. You've got all sorts of dynamics at play. We went through consolidation here in Oktibbeha County. I'm very aware of the pain and the hand wrenching that you go through with those sorts of things. It was the best thing that we could have done for our county. I do believe that other counties would have the same experience, but you do have to go through some of that pain on the front end. And part of the conversation with choice and consolidation, to me, all of these have to kind of marry each other at some point. You have to be understanding of what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And we need to be able to assume that over the course of some time, that there are going to be other viable options. Like the Delta is a good example of it being, there's just not being a whole lot of options out there for people to send their children to other places. So there is somewhat of a theory that if you allow these kids to go somewhere else, that maybe there would be other options, whether that be charter or whatever, that would open up in those areas.
I think you said that the school choice debate is not new, and we already have several versions of school choice here. We have charters, we have a limited ESA program. Mainly what we heard at the committee, though, was a push for a universal ESA. I'm wondering kind of where you stand on that, and if that is not the version you would prefer, kind of what different program would you prioritize if it comes down to an omnibus bill?
I've gone in a couple of directions with this and in my own head and heart. I don't know that full-blown school choice will work here. And I say that because there's a money dynamic at play here. If we did a full-blown school choice bill to allow anybody to do whatever they wanted to, wherever they wanted, we're going to have to capture about 50,000 kids that are currently in private school that we're not capturing right now. That's $300 to $500 million more dollars, and I just don't see us having it. I think where my head is leading for the moment is trying to come up with some type of dynamic that the poorest of the poor kids, and potentially maybe even up to 300% of the poverty level, they would have the opportunity to take the state portion and do something with it at that point. I think that would be far more manageable moving forward. That's where my head is for the moment. That's not to suggest that it couldn't change as we're developing some of these ideas, but as I want to hear from the other side in terms of what some of their solutions would be for some of these things as well, and see what they say. And honestly, I don't want to hear that we just need to dump more money into it. I think that is a worn out answer to the question of how do we make our schools better. Now, that being said, I'm well aware that it takes money to operate schools. I'm not saying that we should reduce funding for them. But if that's the answer, go to the drawing board. My gosh, have a little bit more a forethought in what you're trying to accomplish here. than to say, let's go and throw more money at it.
Chairman, I want to ask a little bit more about the legislative strategy behind the comprehensive package approach, because of course we know last session you and the Speaker took a different approach. These different priorities were kind of standalone bills. So we've heard the Speaker explain his reasoning. I wanted to get your take on it because, of course, last session, as you will know, with one of the main school choice bills that ultimately didn't make it up for a vote on the House floor. There was some controversy around members not wanting their votes recorded. It was or not having a roll call, et cetera. So, I think it's fair to say there's concern from some members about, or was at least last session, voting on the record and getting their position on the record on some of these policies. So did that play into the push for a comprehensive package? And if not, just explain kind of your thinking there.
No, I can honestly say it wasn't where my thoughts were. The bigger this bill gets, the harder it is it's harder for me to explain. So, and it's not undoable, but I think the idea is to build something in this one bill that suggests a reform policy movement in the direction that we're going in. Keep in mind, it's not just the choice piece. There is a consolidation piece that we're trying to work out and see how that looks in this. There is a reading program that for coaches and that MDE wants. So we're looking at plugging in some of those things. So this idea is to give us a bill that kind of opens the door up for what we view the next 5 to 10 years to look like moving forward, and having this conversation, which that was a great question. But I think that it's more to the point of having all the bits and pieces, and we're not going to capture every piece. I don't suggest that we will, but the idea is to have a better understanding as to exactly what direction we want to go. And, if it's not working whenever you do it one piece at a time, sometimes putting pieces together makes it look a little more appealing to people.
Sure. But as of right now, of course, recognizing the session is months away, you think we can still expect open enrollment, which we haven't talked about, and other school choice pieces, consolidation, to be in the same package?
Yes.
Okay.
It on August, whatever.
Sure.
Where August 29th, I think this is where we're at. Come January, that may be a different story. So I've learned to be willing and nimble to move around a little bit here. But I think the whole point of this is to let as many people know this is what our thoughts are, and get feedback from the public, get feedback from our schools, get feedback from our superintendents. And sometimes I kind of know what the feedback's going to be, but I still want to hear it. I still want to know what they're going to say.
Mr. Chairman, you mentioned a couple of things. Number one, you want to target the poorer families and children with what you do with this. Number two, you mentioned the equation right now between private schools and public schools is not equal. As you mentioned, a private school can turn away children with disabilities, potentially special needs. In looking at school choice or how do you tackle those two things? Do you make private schools take children, which, that has not been a real popular idea that I know of. How do you manage those two things as you look at this?
Well, there are schools out there and I think that there will be more of these types of schools that pop up out there for children with special needs, whether that be for dyslexia or we have the school for the blind. We have these different schools out there that could be beneficial in that arena. As far as forcing a private school to accept a child, I don't think that's going to work, and I don't think anybody thinks that would work when it's all said and done. But more to the point would be we need to reduce some of the regulatory inefficiencies for public schools. We need to lower that threshold for them to be able to do some things that would work for that district or work for that community. So part of this argument and part of these dynamics that are at play here, public schools are getting a positive thing that's coming out of this as well. Something to keep in mind is a private school, even if we move the money that the state pays for that student to a private school, that private school is still not getting the local tax dollar. The public school is. So they're still getting a local contribution from your community. So when we look at this from our standpoint, it's not just the money from the state that's propping up a lot of our public schools. It's the local contribution that's happening too. And it's one of those deals where I had somebody say, "Oh, we're going to make are we going to make private schools pick up kids and have the transportation?" And I think that's a great question, but it's almost to suggest that the public schools don't have a head start on the private schools. Think about this. If the school is willing to come pick your child up, and that continues to be the deal in the future, and you have a choice between a public and a private, and let's say they were equal in the how it's looked at upon, the public school is going to have more money. They're going to have more benefits to go there. Still, as we look at it from the standpoint of having choice, keep in mind, we're talking about the state part of the money leaving the school district and that parent being able to use that money to go to a different school, right? That's not talking about the local money. We can't do anything with that. So that local money still goes to your public school. So they still get a benefit. Keep this in mind. If the kids that went to private schools came back to public schools, the state would be out $300 to $500 million more than we currently are today. That's the reality that we have. Everybody that's on the public school side have a tendency to look like a little bit of righteous indignation toward people that go to an academy. They're saving our public schools money right now. They're saving the state money. But the public school is still getting the local contribution. The public schools are still getting the ability to now that doesn't work that well in the Delta. So you've got the population centers have a tendency to draw that out a little bit clearer. But whenever you get into a smaller rural areas, that has a tendency to diminish a bit. But there's things here that if we could bring some of the positive things that public schools have and share in the ideas between public and private and give that parent the ability to pick what's best for their kid, I think it's a win-win all the way around when it's all said and done.
I'm glad you brought up the dollar amount, because that's a question that's been rolling around in my head, is just, can the state afford to do this? So I think in Arizona, the first year of vouchers, they projected it would cost $33 million. That number, when it was all said and done, was closer to $550. So if every, private school student in Mississippi applies for a voucher, if that's what we do and end up passing, would that not be the same cost to the state? Would it not be $300 million that we don't have to pay for right now?
Yes, what you said is correct. I mean, I do believe it would, if we had a universal voucher system, we're looking at anywhere, and I've ranged it from $300 million to $500 million. I don't know exactly what that number would be, because I just don't know exactly how many kids are we talking about here. That doesn't include your kids that are in school choice. That doesn't count kids that were just not counting for whatever reason. So, I mean, I think that's a valid concern. That's one of the reasons I've talked about is us looking at this from the standpoint of giving the children with the inability period to have that choice first. Now, that being said, my experience has been, while I've been in government, we can afford what we want to afford. If this is a priority, and if we make it a priority, we can afford to do what we need to do. And keep in mind, those people that we're talking about that aren't getting their money, they pay taxes too. They're getting nothing for that at least that portion of the tax today, other than they've got a public school system that's operating in their community. There is the argument on the other side here that something is better than nothing. In other words, a bad school in an area is better than having no school in an area. I disagree. I would rather us put our resources toward good facilities, good educational systems, and even if we have to make certain that these kids get there and it's a 25-mile drive or a 50-mile drive. We've got kids, y'all, that are in Alaska and some other very, very desolate places that have to be flown in to school. We act like a 20-minute drive in a school bus is going to kill people. I think we've got to get a little bit more strengthened on what the intent is. The intent when you send your kid to school is not to keep them there for the day so you can go to work. It's for them to get educated. And some places that's not happening.
Mr. Chairman, I know we're running a little short on time, but maybe here at the end, I'll put you on the spot. I think you reiterated, and I think Speaker White has said before, I guess the real politic is there's probably not a way to pass universal vouchers or whatever you want to call it, full-on school choice. Your estimation, what is there an appetite for? Looking at it right now, months out, what do you foresee being able to pass?
I think that we're going to pass some type of school choice program that fits Mississippi for where we are today. That may grow into something later. I do like to think that if we go down a road that I'm going to be prepared enough to explain why we're doing what we're doing and get almost anything we think is good passed. Now, that being said, this is very much a local issue for a lot of our politicians.
Sure.
And it's tough for them. The politics, look, I'm well aware of the politics that are surrounding this. So I get that you're going to have some holdouts in terms of being just very nervous, but I really do believe this. If you're going to the legislature to get reelected, and you think that's your job every year, then by all means do it that way. I stopped doing that a few years ago. I want to do what I think is best for our kids, and if that means that I go home, that's just what that means. And I'm perfectly content with that. And I think everybody's going to have to come to the same term.
Sure. Well, we're looking forward. You plan to hold more hearings prior to the session, correct? Yes,
we've got at least 3 more coming. I do want to make certain that everyone understands that we're going to have some people that are against school choice. I want to hear what their thoughts are. Sometimes you end up with something brilliant that comes out of this that you may have not expected. I'm willing to listen and find out what we can find out. But the bottom line is we're trying to be as balanced as we can with this. The other day when we were doing the questions and answers, I tried my darndest to not say anything. Let whatever question pop up, let that question work itself through. And it was an hour and a half of questions. And I mean, it was a long day for anybody that sit in there. It was about 3.5 hours. So it got to be kind of a long meeting, but that was just with 2 people. Can you imagine if we'd had a third person in there to have talked to? My goodness. But to your point, we're going to continue having this conversation. We're going to talk to people that are against choice. I also want to talk to people that are against consolidation or what are some of their other options? I want to hear what the options are. What is it that we can do? And you never know. We may have something just absolutely brilliant that comes from these. Sometimes I kind of doubt much brilliance comes from a bunch of politicians hanging out together, but maybe we will.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we really appreciate you coming on, and I hope to get you back on soon as y'all continue to work on this.
It sounds good. Anytime y'all want me, I'll come.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank y'all.